Ethan still remembers the exact sound of silence after he said, "I like you." It was deafening, louder than the whir of the centrifuge, louder than the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Adrian had blinked once, twice, then laughed nervously, like he thought it was a joke. And then, nothing. Just a full year of nothing. It's funny how a single moment can stretch into a year of avoidance. A year of awkward coffee breaks, exchanged reports without eye contact, and lab meetings where even breathing felt choreographed. Ethan had learned to time his arrivals 5 minutes early if he wanted to avoid Adrian, 10 minutes late if he couldn't stand the silence. But now, on this early autumn morning at Stanford University's Biomedical Research Wing, something had shifted. Because for the first time, Ethan wasn't thinking about Adrian. He was thinking about Luke, the new postdoc from Chicago, who smiled like sunlight and didn't flinch when their hands brushed over a microscope slide. Adrian noticed. He noticed it the way one notices a missing heartbeat, a subtle absence that feels like pain. Ethan's laugh, once so rare, now came easily around Luke. His eyes softened in ways Adrian hadn't seen in months. It made something twist deep inside him, something that tasted like jealousy, guilt, and the faint metallic sting of regret. The day Ethan confessed had been so ordinary it felt cruel in retrospect. They were calibrating pipettes, talking about the new CRISPR trials. Ethan's voice had been steady, almost too steady when he said it. "Adrian, I think I like you." It wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. Adrian had just stared, his throat tight. His mind scrambled through every possible response except the one that mattered. And then he'd said, "You're kidding, right?" That night, Ethan went home, stared at his ceiling, and realized he wasn't just heartbroken. He was humiliated. After that, things changed. Adrian stopped coming by Ethan's workstation unless necessary. Their jokes turned into clipped exchanges. Even their shared playlists went silent. The lab, once their shared universe of laughter, late-night takeout, and half-finished hypotheses, became a frozen orbit of avoidance. But people move on, don't they? Ethan did what he always did. He buried himself in work. His thesis became his sanctuary. His notebooks filled with results, his coffee intake doubled, and slowly, his feelings dulled into something manageable, a quiet ache that didn't bleed anymore. Until Luke arrived. Luke had an energy that filled every room, confident but kind, sharp but gentle. He teased Ethan about his color-coded spreadsheets, made fun of his old lab coat, brought him breakfast sandwiches without asking. For the first time in months, Ethan didn't feel like a ghost. Adrian saw them together during a Friday lab meeting, Luke leaning in to whisper something to Ethan, who tried and failed not to smile. It was small, harmless even. But for Adrian, it was like watching the ground shift beneath his feet. Because suddenly, he wasn't the one Ethan turned to anymore. He wasn't the reason Ethan smiled. And that terrified him. "Hey," Adrian said one evening, standing awkwardly at the lab door as everyone else packed up. "Do you have a minute?" Ethan didn't look up from his microscope. "Kind of busy. Can it wait?" Adrian hesitated. "It's been a while since we talked." "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "A year, actually." That silence again, the same one from that day, but heavier now, aged like rust. Adrian stepped closer. "Look, I think I messed up." Ethan finally turned, his eyes cool and distant. "You think?" The words hit harder than Adrian expected. He tried to laugh, but it cracked halfway through. "I didn't know what to say back then." "You could have started with anything that wasn't laughter," Ethan said, voice trembling now, though his expression stayed calm. "Do you have any idea how small that made me feel?" Adrian opened his mouth, but Ethan stood up, gathering his notes. "You don't get to do this now, Adrian. Not when I finally stopped waiting." And just like that, he left, leaving Adrian alone in the sterile white glow of the lab. That night, Adrian didn't go home. He sat in the dark lab, the hum of machines filling the silence. He thought about every time Ethan had brought him coffee, every time their hands had brushed, every time he'd stopped himself from saying what he really felt. Because the truth was simple and cruel. Adrian had liked Ethan too. He'd just been too scared to admit it. Too scared of what people might think. too scared of ruining the friendship, too scared of himself. He remembered the way Ethan had looked at him that day, not with pity, not with confusion, but with hope. And he'd crushed it. Now, watching the faint glow of the city outside the window, Adrian whispered to no one, "I'm sorry, but apologies don't mean much when they come too late." A week later, the lab buzzed with news. Ethan and Luke were officially dating. Or at least that's what everyone assumed, after they showed up together at the faculty mixer laughing, comfortable, completely at ease. Adrian tried to act normal. He smiled, made small talk, even congratulated them. But inside he was unraveling. Luke was charming, yes, and kind, and perfect for Ethan in all the ways Adrian wasn't. But watching Ethan rest his hand on Luke's shoulder felt like watching his own mistake play out in slow motion. Later that night, Adrian found himself in the parking lot, staring at his reflection in the car window. He looked exhausted, empty. He had no one to blame but himself. When Ethan walked by holding Luke's hand, smiling, their eyes met for the briefest second. And in that instant, Adrian understood something brutal. Ethan wasn't his anymore. Maybe he never was. And yet, fate had a way of circling back. 2 months later, the lab hosted a presentation for a major research grant. Ethan was presenting, confident, passionate, the way he always was when he talked about science. Adrian watched from the back, torn between pride and heartbreak. But during the Q&A, something unexpected happened. Ethan's voice faltered. His slides glitched. His usually steady hands trembled slightly. Luke was away at a conference, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan looked alone. Adrian didn't even think. He stepped forward, quietly fixing the technical issue, whispering, "You're okay. Just breathe." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. The room, the people, the noise gone. Just them, and that heavy silence that had haunted them for a year. Ethan smiled, a small, tired smile. "Thanks." Adrian nodded. "Anytime." But this time, when he walked away, Ethan's eyes followed him. Adrian wasn't sure when he started timing his steps to Ethan's schedule again. Maybe it was when he began showing up early 5 minutes before Ethan usually arrived, pretending to check inventory just to see him walk through the lab doors. Or maybe it was when he caught himself remembering how Ethan used to hum quietly while labeling samples, and realized that sound had become his favorite kind of silence. It was pathetic. He knew that. But regret has a gravity of its own, and Adrian was already falling. The morning after the presentation, Adrian stood in the lab kitchen, watching the coffee drip, one bitter drop at a time. The place smelled like caffeine and chemicals, comfortingly familiar, painfully nostalgic. He turned when he heard footsteps. Ethan walked in, hair slightly messy, carrying a folder tucked under his arm. His eyes flicked up and paused when he saw Adrian. "Morning," Ethan said, polite, neutral. Adrian nodded. "Morning. You, did great yesterday. Really. The presentation was solid." Ethan smiled faintly, pouring himself a cup. "Thanks for helping with the glitch." "You would have handled it," Adrian said, forcing a laugh. "You always do." That almost earned a real smile. Almost. But then Ethan turned to leave, and Adrian's chest tightened. The words burned on his tongue, desperate to be said. "Ethan, wait." Ethan froze, hand on the doorframe. Adrian's voice trembled despite his best effort. I wanted to say I'm sorry for how I handled everything, for making you feel small. That wasn't fair. I thought ignoring it would make things easier, but it didn't. It just ruined everything." The silence stretched, again. Always that silence. Ethan didn't turn around. "I appreciate that," he said softly. "But some things can't be undone." Adrian closed his eyes. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know." Ethan hesitated and then left. That night, Adrian walked home through the cool Palo Alto streets, the wind sharp against his face. Streetlights glowed like distant stars, and for once, he let the ache in his chest stay instead of drowning it in work. He thought of the first night they'd worked late together, the hum of the lab, Ethan's laughter echoing through the quiet corridors, his bright curiosity about everything. Adrian remembered thinking, God, how can someone make science feel like music? He hadn't realized it was love back then. He just thought he liked being near Ethan. That his laughter made the fluorescent lights feel warmer. Now every memory was a ghost. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to convince himself that he was fine. Luke was kind, reliable, and easy to be around. He never made Ethan second-guess himself, never left sentences unfinished. Their relationship was simple, predictable. Maybe that was the problem. Because one night, when Luke leaned in to kiss him after dinner, Ethan's mind betrayed him. It wasn't Luke's hand he felt on his cheek, it was Adrian's. It wasn't Luke's laugh echoing in his head, it was that warm, low chuckle from the lab, the one that used to make Ethan's heart trip over itself. He pulled away before the kiss landed. "Ethan?" Luke asked gently. "You okay?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." Luke studied him for a moment, concern flickering behind his eyes. "You've been somewhere else lately." Ethan forced a smile. "Just work." But that night, lying awake in the quiet apartment, Ethan finally admitted to himself what he'd been denying for months. He wasn't over Adrian. He never had been. 2 weeks passed. The lab grew busier as deadlines piled up. Luke had flown back to Chicago for a conference, and the quiet returned, the kind of quiet that made Ethan aware of every small sound. The hum of the centrifuge, the shuffle of Adrian's footsteps, the faint clink of glassware. They worked side by side again, unplanned, unavoidable. At first, neither spoke beyond what was necessary. But routine has a strange way of rebuilding bridges. One shared note, one sarcastic comment, one half-smile at a failed experiment. One afternoon, Ethan reached for a pipette at the same time Adrian did. Their hands brushed. Neither moved for a second too long. Adrian laughed softly. "Guess old habits die hard." Ethan's throat tightened. "Some don't die at all." The air thickened between them, heavy, charged, unspoken. Ethan stepped back quickly, pretending to check the data screen. "We should focus, right?" Adrian murmured, but his eyes lingered. That evening, Ethan stayed late again. The lab was empty, lit only by the faint blue glow of equipment monitors. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. He was adjusting data outputs when he heard the door open. Adrian stood there, dripping slightly from the rain, holding 2 paper cups. "Coffee. One black, one hazelnut." "I remembered which one's yours." Ethan froze, then slowly reached out to take it. "Thanks." Adrian sat on the nearby stool, hesitating. "I wasn't sure if you'd still like the same thing." "I do," Ethan said softly. "Some things don't change." Adrian smiled faintly. "You say that like it's a bad thing." They sat in silence for a long time, the kind that felt fragile, the kind that could shatter if either of them breathed too loud. Finally, Adrian spoke. "Do you ever think about that night?" Ethan didn't need to ask which one. "Every day." Adrian's eyes glistened. "Me too." Ethan's laugh came out bitter. "You have a funny way of showing it." "I know," Adrian whispered, "and I hate myself for it. I thought pretending it never happened would protect us. But I only ended up losing you." Ethan's voice trembled. "You didn't just lose me, Adrian. You made me feel like what I felt was something to be ashamed of." The words cut deeper than any accusation. Adrian swallowed hard. "I never wanted you to feel that. I was scared. Of people, of myself, of what it meant." Ethan looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time, he saw not the confident, charming Adrian everyone admired, but someone small, fragile, and terrified of being seen. Ethan exhaled. "You can't undo the past." "No," Adrian said quietly, "but maybe I can stop running from it." That night, after Adrian left, Ethan sat alone in the lab, staring at the empty cup on the table. The rain outside had stopped, but the echo of Adrian's words lingered in his chest. He didn't know what forgiveness looked like yet, but maybe, just maybe, it started with being honest. So the next day, Ethan asked Adrian to join him for lunch. They sat at a small cafe across the street from campus, the kind with scratched wooden tables and bad jazz music. For a while, they talked about everything except what mattered: research updates, grant deadlines, the new intern who kept breaking glass slides. But eventually, Ethan said quietly, "Luke's going back to Chicago. He got offered a permanent position." Adrian's stomach twisted. "That's great for him." Ethan nodded. "It is." A long pause. "And for you?" Ethan met his gaze. "I don't know yet." Adrian looked down. "I shouldn't ask, but are you too?" "Over," Ethan said simply. "It ended before it began. He deserves someone who's fully there. And you're not." Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm not." Adrian's heart pounded, but he stayed silent. Then Ethan smiled, faintly sad, but lighter somehow. "I used to think you didn't feel anything that night, that it was just me. But I see now that maybe you did. You were just too afraid to let it exist." "I was," Adrian admitted. "But I'm not anymore." Ethan tilted his head, studying him. "What changed?" Adrian's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Losing you." For the first time in a year, Ethan didn't look away. He didn't smile, didn't speak, he just watched Adrian, as if seeing him for the first time. The wind brushed through the open cafe window, carrying the scent of rain and roasted coffee. It was quiet, but it wasn't the old silence anymore. This one felt alive, charged with possibility. Adrian broke the stillness with a small, shaky laugh. "So what now?" Ethan stirred his coffee slowly. "Now? We work. We figure out if what's left between us is still love, or just memory." Adrian nodded, relief softening his features. "I can live with that." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. "Yeah, me too." That afternoon, they walked back to the lab together. The sun dipped low, painting everything in golden light, that same light that had witnessed their first confession, their first silence, and now, their first fragile truce. And as they stood side by side, Adrian glanced at Ethan and said softly, "You know, the first thing I noticed about you wasn't your brain." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh," Adrian grinned, a little sheepish. "It was the way you talked about stars while explaining chemical reactions. Like you believed the universe wasn't that different from people." Ethan chuckled, the sound warm and real this time. "Maybe it isn't." Adrian smiled. "Then maybe we've just been orbiting each other all this time." Ethan looked at him, eyes gentle, thoughtful. "Maybe it's time we stop running in circles." The first real test came sooner than either of them expected. The university had announced a funding evaluation for their research group, the kind of review that could make or break their careers. Deadlines tightened, tempers flared, and sleep became a distant dream. Adrian noticed the dark circles under Ethan's eyes growing deeper by the day. He wanted to help, to share the weight, but Ethan had retreated again, not into coldness, but into focus, into the walls he built when he was scared to feel too much. One night, at 2 a.m., Adrian found Ethan still in the lab, surrounded by papers, empty coffee cups, and glowing monitors. The rain tapped softly against the windows. Ethan didn't notice him come in. "Hey," Adrian said quietly. Ethan jumped slightly, then exhaled when he saw who it was. "Adrian, you should be home. I could say the same to you." Ethan tried to smile, but it looked more like exhaustion wearing a brave face. "I can't leave yet. The data for the protein trials isn't aligning. If this fails, the entire grant won't disappear overnight." Adrian interrupted gently. "You need sleep, Ethan." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't have time to sleep." "Then let me help," Adrian said, stepping closer. Ethan froze. "Adrian, please. I know what you're trying to prove. You've been carrying this lab since day one, but you don't have to do it alone." The room fell quiet. Ethan stared at him, eyes softening, and for a moment, the old barriers wavered. Then he looked away. "I don't know how to let anyone in again," he whispered. Adrian's chest ached at that. "Then start small," he said, pulling up a stool. "Let me stay." They worked side by side until dawn, no words, just quiet breathing, soft keyboard clicks, and the hum of machines. When Ethan finally fell asleep at the desk, Adrian covered him with his own jacket and stayed until the morning sunlight poured through the blinds. It was the first time in a long time that Ethan hadn't woken up alone. A week later, the day of the funding review arrived. The presentation was going smoothly until disaster struck. During the live demonstration, one of the test samples malfunctioned. The data froze, the program crashed, and the entire room filled with static panic. Ethan's heart raced. This was his project, his reputation. He tried to fix it, but his hands trembled. His breathing quickened, shallow and ragged. Adrian saw it instantly, the fear, the way Ethan's confidence cracked like glass. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. "It's just a minor software delay," Adrian said, addressing the panel with a composed smile. "Give us 30 seconds. He leaned closer to Ethan, whispering, "Hey, look at me." Ethan's eyes flicked up, wide and unfocused. "Breathe," Adrian murmured. "You've got this, just like we practiced. Together." Something in Ethan's chest unclenched. He nodded faintly, took a deep breath, and resumed typing. Within moments, the data synced. The graphs came alive again, lines of success glowing on the screen. When the room erupted in applause, Ethan didn't hear it. He was too busy looking at Adrian, the man who had just steadied his entire world with a few quiet words. That night, after the evaluation team left and the building emptied, Ethan sat alone in the lab again. This time, Adrian didn't hesitate to join him. They sat on the floor between two lab benches, sharing leftover sandwiches and the heavy, humming silence that had once scared them both. Ethan broke it first. "You saved me today." Adrian smiled softly. "No, I just reminded you that you didn't need saving." Ethan looked at him, eyes glassy with fatigue and emotion. "You were always better at saying the right thing." Adrian chuckled. "Not always. I said the worst possible thing a year ago." Ethan's gaze softened. "Yeah, you did." They both laughed, small, real, a little painful. "I thought I could just forget," Ethan said. "Move on. But every time I tried, you were there in every experiment, every stupid coffee cup, every song that played too late at night." Adrian leaned back against the cabinet, staring at the ceiling. "You think I didn't feel the same? You haunted me, Ethan. I could barely walk into this lab without remembering what I threw away." Ethan turned toward him. "Then why now? Why come back?" Adrian's voice was quiet but certain. "Because I'm done being scared. I'm done hiding behind logic and fear. I love you, Ethan. I've loved you since the first time you spilled acid on my notes and looked like you'd committed a war crime." Ethan blinked and then laughed, tears slipping down his cheeks. "That was a very expensive accident." "Yeah," Adrian grinned. "And totally worth it." The laughter faded, replaced by a silence that wasn't empty anymore, it was full. Ethan's voice trembled. "You can't just say that after a year of silence." "I know," Adrian said. "That's why I'm showing you instead." He reached out slowly, giving Ethan every chance to pull away. But Ethan didn't move. His breath caught when Adrian's hand found his. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, human, real, the kind of touch that said, "I'm still here. I'm sorry. Let's start again." Ethan closed his eyes. "You're late," Adrian smiled. "I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it." The next few months were a slow rebuild, not of romance, but of trust. They learned to work together again, to talk without walking on glass, to laugh without guilt. Sometimes they stayed late, not because of deadlines, but because being in that shared space felt right again. Sometimes Ethan would catch Adrian staring at him across the microscope, and the warmth in those brown eyes made the sterile lab feel like home. Their relationship didn't need grand gestures. It was in the quiet things. The extra coffee waiting on Ethan's desk. The jacket draped over Adrian's shoulders after a long shift. The shared playlists they'd stopped listening to now playing again softly through the lab speakers. One evening, as the sun dipped low outside, Ethan looked up from his notes and found Adrian watching him. "What?" Ethan asked, smiling. Adrian shrugged, trying to look casual. "Just thinking how far we've come." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "From heartbreak to scientific breakthroughs? From fear to finally getting it right." Adrian said quietly. Ethan's smile softened. You know, for a guy who used to run from feelings, you're getting pretty good at expressing them. Adrian laughed. Blame you. You make honesty feel easy. Ethan tilted his head. It wasn't easy a year ago. Adrian nodded. No, but sometimes love isn't about the perfect timing. It's about coming back after everything and still choosing each other. Ethan looked at him for a long moment, the weight of every unspoken word filling the space between them. Then he whispered, "Then I'm choosing you." Adrian's breath caught. "Even after everything I put you through?" Ethan smiled, tears glimmering in the light. "Especially after everything." And this time, when Adrian leaned in, Ethan didn't flinch. Their lips met softly, hesitant at first, then sure. The kind of kiss that wasn't about passion, but peace. The kind that said, "We made it." Outside, the campus lights flickered on. Inside, two scientists finally stopped running. Months later, their paper was published, a breakthrough study credited to Dr. Ethan Rowe and Dr. Adrian Hayes. The lab celebrated, but for them, the real victory wasn't in the research. It was in finding balance again between logic and love, courage and vulnerability. One evening, as they locked up the lab together, Adrian paused by the door. "You ever think about that night?" Ethan smiled knowingly. "Which one? The disaster confession or the disastrous silence?" Adrian laughed. "Both." Ethan reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Yeah, but I also think about this one." Adrian raised a brow. "This one?" Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "The night we finally stopped pretending." Adrian's smile spread slow and certain. "Yeah, this one's better." They walked out into the cool evening air, their shadows stretching long across the campus lawn. The stars were just starting to appear, faint, scattered, unassuming. Ethan looked up, remembering something Adrian had once said about the universe and people not being that different. "Maybe we're just stardust," Ethan murmured, "colliding until something beautiful forms." Adrian squeezed his hand. "Then I'm glad I collided with you." Ethan smiled. Finally, the one experiment that actually worked. And as they walked away, the glass walls of the lab reflected their laughter, two figures framed by science, love, and the second chance they both thought they'd lost. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.